It's a team which, it sounds cliche, but it's very small margins with them, and it could have gone either way. Now Callum Wilson really carried Newcastle at times. At the moment, they're actually weaker than where they finished last season.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another Premier Pundits podcast. The Euros is done and dusted, and we're back to the day job on the Premier League, and we're kicking off our YouTube season with a look at all Premier League teams heading into the new campaign. So today, I'm thrilled to be joined by a fantastic guest. The first one, of course, it's my hometown club as well. It's the Newcastle correspondent for The Athletic. It's Mr. Chris Waugh. How are you, my friend? And great for you to be here, and thank you once again.
No, I'm very good. Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, it's strange to now be thinking. I mean, obviously, I've had to think about Newcastle all the way through the summer, but now the Euros over, it is fully back to Premier League focus now, isn't it? So
it is, mate. It is. I mean, obviously, I'm a Newcastle supporter myself. I do have the luxury of being able to switch off at the end of a Premier League season, and my focus has been on Euros, and we all know it. You know, it's injury related. I mean, how depressing is it having to focus on Newcastle all day, every day of your working life?
I mean, I don't get me wrong. I feel very privileged to be in the position that I am and doing a job that a lot of people would love. But equally, yes, it can be, particularly over the last year or two with the sort of takeover saga and the general way the club is. It's been draining over the last few weeks with the Euros. I mean, June's always a difficult time anyway, regardless for most club reporters, because nothing really happens or very little tends to happen. But at Newcastle United, there's been even less of that, and we're just waiting on so many things to sort of happen. So it has been difficult to sort of keep it ticking along. I'm not going to lie.
And we'll be waiting and waiting and waiting and having the same conversations, further down the line. I'm sure of that. But the purpose of today's sort of quick catch-up is to give our audience a little bit of insight into Newcastle United, hopefully ahead of the new season. We're looking at it from maybe a fantasy perspective, looking at maybe discussions around Steve Bruce, tactics and players. I just want, before we go into that, I want to cast a mind back to last year, and the 2020 season, and Newcastle finished 12th. Good campaign overall. I mean, there was a lot of suggestion we're going to get sucked into that relegation dogfight, dropping down to the second tier. It didn't happen, and yeah, we finished 12th. So all good on Tyneside, I assume.
Well, that is the impression that if people just look back on the campaign and they don't know anything about it and they see 12th, I mean, it was sort of the first half of the campaign before Newcastle really got themselves into trouble as well. Results sort of belied performances in many ways. And I think a lot of Newcastle fans would argue that in terms of the underlying statistics of games and metrics, just watching games, that really they sort of saw the subsequent downfall coming along, that really performances hadn't warranted the results Newcastle had got. And so, yes, in the end, Newcastle finished 12th, but going into the last international break in March, Newcastle were on the cusp of dropping into the relegation zone. Didn't actually fall in the relegation zone all season, but Fulham sort of tailed off after that point, and Newcastle really picked up and ended the season in fantastic form, really turned around at that stage in March. I think that there was an overwhelming fan opinion that Steve Bruce needed to go. Between January and March, Newcastle only won 2 matches. I think they won 2 of 21 in all competitions. The performances were poor. They were conceding goals. They weren't scoring. They had COVID issues, injuries. There was worries about what the style of play was, what they were trying to aim towards, what was Bruce's grand vision, what is my way, as he famously said in January when he said that things are going to be my way now after Newcastle lost at Sheffield United shambolic style. But they did pick up Graeme Jones, who's obviously been with England this summer as one of Gareth Southgate's assistants, arrived in January. He helped really transform the way Newcastle were playing, and Steve Bruce, to his credit, helped to turn things around. Joe Willock's form late in the season, scored 7 consecutive matches, was huge for Newcastle, and they ended up somehow finishing 12th, which seems inexplicable. If you'd have said that to anyone in March, I think they would have laughed in your face. But now, really, the key is it's a really difficult campaign to look back on, because there were so many. If you just look at the end of the season, there's so many positives. You look at the first 2/3 of the season, there are so many negatives. And it's about consistency with Newcastle. It's about how can they translate this into becoming a more consistent team, rather than someone who is really in a relegation scrap until the middle of April, until they really claw themselves clear.
Yeah, I mean, you touched upon the form of Joe Willock. 7-7. I think in the last 8 games, Newcastle finished 5th in the form table, won 5, drew 1, lost 2. Do you think the form of Willock and his goals maybe helped paper over a lot of cracks, at that club? And like you say, from the outsiders looking in, people saying that, Newcastle doing all right. If things kind of be that bad under Mike Ashley, but do you think, like I say, is it that those Willock's goals and those results which maybe, give that false impression of really, what lies beneath?
It does to a certain degree, I think, yes. I mean, Willock scoring some important goals. He came off the bench to score at Liverpool. Newcastle rescued a point there. He scored off the bench against Tottenham. Newcastle rescued a point there. He scored a few other important goals, decisive ones. But mixed in with that, there was also some very good performances. Newcastle were excellent for 80 minutes away at Leicester. Could and should have won more comfortably than they did in the end, won 4-2, but should have been a lot more comfortable. They put in another couple of really good performances along the way. But equally, there were also some matches where they really got away with it. Burnley was probably the game that turned the season for Newcastle, and that was Alan Saint-Maximin inspired. He came off the bench when they were 1-0 down, provided an assist and a goal. But for an hour at Turf Moor, Newcastle were awful. So I think that it's a team which, it sounds cliche, but it's very small margins with them, and it could have gone either way. And there were some moments of individual quality which really saved them. Injuries really affected them throughout the season, but they need to try and find a degree of consistency. That's the real difference. And at this moment, the problem is with this Newcastle side, you have no idea which team's going to turn up week on week. One week they go to Leicester and score 4 goals. The next week they play Arsenal at home, are absolutely awful and lose 1-0. That is the problem with this side. And Steve Bruce at the moment hasn't been able to get any sort of medium to long-term consistency from them.
And do you think to maybe enable that level of consistency that we need, do you think there are sort of areas of the squad that need to be addressed, strengthened? Obviously, ensuring availability. The loss of Callum Wilson to a couple of quite serious hamstring injuries had a big impact on the club. Do you think that's something that Steve Bruce and the club will need to address? And what do you think that the likelihood of that actually happening going forward is going to be?
Well, I'll caveat any answer I'm about to give by there's the big question mark over Newcastle United, as there has been for the last 18 months, of the prospective takeover. And obviously Newcastle at the minute are in arbitration with the Premier League to try and see whether they can force through the Saudi finance takeover. Mike Ashley has also taken the Premier League to the competition arbitration tribunal to try and privately push it through.
Say that after a few bites, Chris.
Exactly, I can't even say it after no bites. I mean a few. But so that's a real complicating factor. And at the moment, we're sort of waiting on the results of those. And that is shaping potentially the transfer business Newcastle will do and what they need to focus on for the future. And that is a concern because we're well into July now. Clubs are starting to do business again, and Newcastle haven't yet brought in anyone. The areas of the team they really do need to strengthen, that Steve Bruce wants to strengthen, is certainly in midfield. I mean, if you think about where they are now compared to where they were at the end of May, they were already weaker in midfield than they were then because Joe Willock has returned to being on loan at Arsenal. Steve Bruce very much wants to sign him. But at the moment, no deals in place there. Willock is set to play in pre-season for Arsenal, trying to earn his position there. And so Newcastle have got a big hole there. And Bruce also wants greater physicality, wants a sort of... They wanted Hamza Chowdhury from Leicester City in January. He still has an interest in a player like that, someone who can break up play and then push the ball forward on them. Also, centre-back. He's wanted a new centre-back basically ever since he arrived at Newcastle. They've re-signed Federico Fernandez to keep on board, which is important, but he has had injury problems. All of their centre-backs last season had injury or COVID problems, but Bruce wants a ball-playing defender, really. The idea is that Newcastle are going to try and be a bit more progressive in the start of next year. That is at least the vision which is being sold to players who they're trying to sign. They're trying to get William Saliba from Arsenal on loan. He's going to go to Marseille in France by the looks of it, but apparently Newcastle were quite impressive in what they sort of presented to him as a way going forward, and Arsenal liked what they'd seen in terms of the development of Joe Willock. So there's another key area. And then also everyone will point to the forward situation. Now, Callum Wilson really carried Newcastle at times last season to score 12 goals in that team, in a team that struggled so much. And considering he missed a third of the season himself through injuries, they need backup for him. the issue you're going to have there is, financially, Newcastle don't have much money. Certainly at this moment in time, Bruce doesn't expect to have too much money and isn't likely to be given any more until the takeover situation is resolved. And if you already have Callum Wilson, if you're trying to sign another striker, the likelihood is that striker knows they're coming in and probably aren't going to start if Wilson's there. So who is going to be attracted to be that sort of reserve player? Andy Carroll, as things stand, has been released by Newcastle. He's meant to have been in talks. We have no idea whether that is going to result in him staying, but he only scored 1 goal in 2 seasons anyway. Dwight Gale has signed a new 3-year contract, but has flattered to deceive as well over the last couple of years. Hasn't scored many goals himself. Steve Bruce hasn't seemed to trust him. So really, they do lack firepower up front. And beyond the goals of Wilson and Willock, they didn't really have many players who went on to score many. I think Almiron and Saint-Maximin got 4 and 3 respectively between them. And that isn't enough for Newcastle. They need more goals somewhere. But yes, the perennial issue, as it always is at Newcastle, is finance and whether Mike Ashley is going to loosen the purse strings. If a takeover was to happen, then I think we'd see a very different situation where I think Steve Bruce's position would then come under question, and then the transfer situation would look very, very different. But that is the big what if. And at the moment, Steve Bruce is having to push to try and get his own signings in.
Yeah. So we shouldn't read too much into the fact that when talking to NUFC TV about the possibility of players coming in and being at this Yorkshire training camp as a good way of integrating new players when they're away. Potentially we're not looking at any new signings, whether that be permanent or loan deals that we're aware of at this moment in time, who are, near getting over the line.
Not that I haven't heard that anything is imminent, and I hope I am incorrect. I hope that just haven't leaked out and Newcastle are close to signing someone. It was funny, the smirk from Bruce as he said it, it was difficult to work out whether it was in that sense that he expects people to arrive or whether it's in that he wanted people to arrive and they haven't yet. And I mean, I haven't been informed that anything is imminent. As I say, they are working in the background on certain deals. They do want a centre back. They do want a couple of centre midfielders and potentially a forward. They've looked at Christopher Ayer at Celtic as a defender. Yeah. They like Cameron Carter-Vickers at Tottenham as well. Graeme Jones has recommended him. Those sorts of players. But the issue for Newcastle at the moment is funds. And I think that what's interesting is that with certain players, you speak to clubs and agents, and it seems that they've done a lot of the background work, done a lot of the talks, found out exactly what's needed in it, and then when the selling club is expecting a bid and the agent expecting a bid, Newcastle haven't been forthcoming with that money yet. And whether that's the takeover situation, it probably is. So I'm not sure that anything is necessarily imminent, but I hope I'm wrong on that front.
Yeah. Oh, good. Optimism, hopefully then. Looking ahead to next season then, Chris, and given obviously everything that you've already outlined and discussed, and the caveat being there's a possibility to take over this, that, and the other. I mean, as it stands with current personnel and Steve Bruce at the helm, and with the best intentions and wishes in the world, he does want to maybe slightly change his tactics in the way Newcastle play. But as it stands, would you expect Newcastle to more or less line up as we did, certainly during that latter part of the season when we had that little bit of a success on the pitch and we got 5 wins out the last 8 games?
That's the assumption we're running by at the moment. I mean, it'd be fascinating to say I haven't decided whether I'm going to York or Harrogate on Sunday because Newcastle are playing their first pre-season friendlies simultaneously with a split squad, but I will be going to one or the other to see them. And the assumption is that Bruce is going to stick with a 3-man central defence, the wing backs of Ritchie and Murphy, and sort of play that similar sort of system that he has been, whether that's Almiron won't be there this weekend, but when the season starts, if it is still Almiron in midfield, that sort of system. Obviously, no Willock there now, but for so long during his tenure, Bruce has said that he wants to play with a 4-man defence. He seems to now have rolled back on that. He seems to now be happy with playing in this way that seems to suit at least some of the players he has in his squad. So I would assume at this moment in time, I'm assuming they are going to start the season playing like that, playing with a back 3. And from the point where Bruce declared his way, the player who featured in every single match, the only player to start every single game, was John Joe Shelvey. So we have to assume that he is going to be vital coming into the new season in terms of the way that Steve Bruce wants to play. Some Newcastle fans, I think, are a bit frustrated by that and think that he hasn't necessarily warranted his place. But for Steve Bruce, he seems to be very important. Then the other key players whose fitness has been part of the issue and part of the reason why Newcastle struggled have to be Allan Saint-Maximin and Callum Wilson. Allan Saint-Maximin makes a huge difference for Newcastle. Just when he's on the pitch, he can create something out of nothing. He terrifies opposition defenders. He pulls them out of play, and he's key to what Newcastle are trying to do. And he's been playing more as almost like a second striker, almost a free role alongside the centre forward later in the season, and it seemed to suit him when he could stay fit. Same with Callum Wilson up top, that ability to sort of pull out wide, score the goals. They're the crucial ones. The big question mark in terms of is who is going to be that sort of roaming midfielder pushing forward if Joe Willock isn't there. At the moment, he isn't a Newcastle United player. So at the moment, they are starting the season without Joe Willock. Miguel Almiron's there to come back in. He's not exactly the same sort of player, doesn't have that same ability to necessarily score as many goals and to penetrate going forward. And they don't have really a like-for-like player in the squad like that. So that seems to be the big gaping hole. It's what Bruce had wanted for the first 18 months of his tenure. He managed to get it in January, albeit on loan. He would like to keep Willock. But if they don't get Willock back, then I think that's a large part of Newcastle's attacking arsenal that they're weakened by, and they need to find an alternative to that.
Yeah, I don't hold much hope out for Willock, in all honesty. I think in my predicted sort of 11, I would have Almiron dropping back in there. The only other place that I really see up for grabs would be coming in that midfield, maybe along Shelvey and Isaac Hayden, back after his injury as well. Does he come in for Longstaff? Does that push maybe Shelvey more out to the left? I just don't know. So I don't know. Newcastle, it just frustrating. But I suppose in the cold light of day, when we look at how we finished the season, if we can carry that little bit of momentum going forward, bring in, even if it's one or two decent, solid loan signings like the Willock, then, there's no reason why we shouldn't have, a half decent season. I mean, for me, it's always that top six, really, who are the teams which are almost that cut above. But everybody else, those maybe 12, 13, 14, there's not a lot between us, and I think we should have a good top half finish in us, I hope. Do you agree, Chris? Please agree.
I don't think I'm quite as optimistic, but that has to be the guy. Steve Bruce himself has even said at the end of last season that he wants to push on for top 10. He actually said at the end of the 2019-20 season that the goal was top 10. It sort of got reevaluated as Newcastle's season began to fall apart sort of around December time, and he basically said his remit was to keep them up, which it is, but his also stated aim was to reach top 10. If Mike Ashley remains in charge, an unwilling owner who wants to be out, then he will be more than content, I'm sure, with merely surviving and then trying to push the club on. But Steve Bruce at least says the right things in terms of he wants to progress and he wants to move them forward going next season. I think without Joe Willock or without a midfielder like that they do look light in terms of goals still, beyond that they're still going to be massively dependent on Wilson and Sam Maximan. So at the moment, they're actually weaker than where they finished last season. I also think that the gap between, although Newcastle managed to finish 12th because it was really congested, sort of like 12th down to 16, the gap to 11th and then the gap to the top half points-wise was huge. Those teams are likely to strengthen even more. Villa are already spending a lot of money. Everton, with Rafa Benitez now, they are going to look to try and develop and push on. I think that unless players start to arrive, I don't believe Newcastle should be in as difficult a position as they were for a large part of last season. I think they have a better squad than sort of bottom 4, bottom 5. But I think 12th to 14th is probably the position that you would expect that squad to be in. They have a striker who's probably top half, and Sam Maximan, could argue, could maybe get into some of the top half teams. But beyond that, I think they're lacking quality in key areas, and they just don't have the depth really to push that much higher. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that they do strengthen further going forward, but I just think that there are deficiencies within the squad.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard to disagree with any points that you made there. I'm just, there's part of us that just hopes as the fan, as a supporter, if we can keep Callum Wilson and Sam Maxim fit, and even Almiron, I think he's got a big part to play, then there could be some exciting times maybe on Tyneside. But listen, Chris, fantastic insight. Love hearing your views and your thoughts. Thank you again for joining us. It's Chris Waugh, the Newcastle correspondent for The Athletic, and that's your Newcastle preview done. Thanks a lot, mate.
Thanks, anytime.